The chalkboard says yes you may, and it's a way to let people know that they can come in the garden without me putting a big neon flashing open sign. When they finally really stick their head in the entrance of the garden and they're looking around and they're thinking, this is private, is this okay, can we come in here? Then they see a sign that says yes you may. And a lot of people really love that yes you may. I've heard a couple of other people say that, man, I've kind of taken that on as my mantra for this week. Like, I appreciate you giving me permission to do this other unrelated thing, but you said I could, so I will. I stuck a stick in the ground and tied a string to it and just drew perfect circles, playing with a big compass, a garden hose, and ultimately with spray paint. And then just playing, I had construction flags, and so I made a perfect circle of these little construction flags. And once the dirt was here, local guy, contractor, backhoe operator said, what are you doing with that circle? And I said, I'm trying to make a flat space here. I want to make a dance floor here or a performance space, but I just want a flat space. And he said, that's really cool. I will give you my time this weekend. If you'll buy the gas for the machine and buy me some cold beers, I will level that out for you and make it so that it drains and everything. And it was a huge favor. This guy's a professional and is really good at what he does. And he was just so excited that I'd taken the time to play and make this perfect circle. He was really excited by that. He was really turned on by the fact that, and he did me a solid. That guy worked all day with this really amazingly great big piece of equipment, and he finessed it. I mean, he did a better job than I could have done in a week. And it drains perfectly, and it was all just because he saw the whimsy of me making this random perfect circle. Well, the circle was not the initial installation in the garden. The corner that juts out into the street was the first thing that I installed, a big purple hedge of mixed border. And the circle became a way to create a shape and a space without necessarily creating another gigantic flower bed and not necessarily mow more turf. But as a design element, it got stronger and stronger in my mind. I started mowing the lawn. Once there's a perfect circle cut into the ground, it became really easy to create shapes in the grass off of the perfect circle. And it was kind of, again, sort of unintended. I didn't really know I was going to be doing that. But at some point during the summer, there weren't a lot of flowers in the garden, and I was mowing tons and tons of white clover from my lawn, and I was aware that there wasn't a lot for the bees to work on. So I wanted to leave some clover and I wanted to mow the grass. So leaving stripes in the lawn that would leave clover flowering seemed like a logical step, and it became a pretty important design element. Initially I tried to have a spiral, and now basically the stripes in the lawn are 8 concentric circles. And I say there's 8 because I still believe that Pluto is a planet. I'm a big proponent of Pluto coming back. 13 years ago, I saw a blue poppy and a photo lineup of all different colors of poppies, and I decided I wanted to make my own blue hybrid, my own strain of blue poppy. So I have been removing all the bad colors, unwanted colors, and after 13 years, the strain has really strengthened. The blues are much more intense. There are a lot fewer plants to pull out. The plants you don't want are called culls, so there's a lot less to take away. And every year there's more and more, and the variety of colors, the blues are intensifying. So now this annual poppy that I'm growing, the culture of the annual poppy is actually pretty darn easy, and horticulture is hungry for a blue poppy, and this one's one that's easy to grow. So every day that the poppies are blooming, I try desperately to beat the honeybees to the punch. So I come out before the honeybees get here, ideally, and pull out the white ones and pull out the red ones. And when the poppies are ready, they basically fall out of their capsules if you don't take proper care of them. As soon as their little windows are open, the poppies just fall out. And if I don't get to them quick enough, the goldfinches rip these little pods apart and they eat my poppies. And if they hit the ground right where they grow too closely together. So I have to harvest as many as I can and spread them around the world. Well, I like to try and sound grandiose and say that this is the world's only blue Iceland seed crop. And they've been sitting in this wheelbarrow kind of drying out. The way the poppy capsule works, it has a little rooftop, and when the roof opens up, then all the seeds are able to fall out. And it's a really neat device because they stay in this capsule and they stay dry from the rain until the stems mechanically fall down, and that makes sure the seeds spread further and further. And once they're dry, they've been drying in this wheelbarrow for a week or two, and I'm pretty sure all the seeds have fallen out of here. Then I take and just start sieving out all the broken leaves and all the chaffy stuff. Once the seeds have cleaned to this point, I use a sieve and just kind of gravity, and this basically filters out pretty much clean seed. There's a little dust involved, but that's pretty much pure poppy seed with a little bit of dust. The Iceland poppy that I've been hybridizing, once the seeds are all shaken out, I still have all these tons of seeds left, pods left that I can't just throw away. I have to keep playing with them. So this is a flower pot that I've made. I basically crafted a rolling pin that I roll this poppy texture out over and over again. Some of these get painted, some of them get glazed, some are left plain, just terracotta pots. And I'm growing succulents in them now, full sun succulents for this group of pots. Particular group is for a wedding. So I've got a whole bunch of pots, all similarly sized and lots of different colors. But it's just another way for me to keep going on poppies when the poppy season is over. This is an acorn that I make. This is just low fire earthenware terracotta. The acorns are all different sizes. Some are hand sized, some are football sized. And the top texture, the cap of the acorn, is made from a mold that I make from sunflowers. So here's the sunflower seeds. I gotta set this down. And while the seeds are still in the sunflower head, I press them in clay and I get this amazing kind of fractal texture that's just representative of the sunflower. But then once there's not a sunflower involved, it's almost exactly like what the top of an acorn looks like anyway. So this kind of shingle thing. So I just make acorns and poppies all the time. I sit and watch TV with a heater under my work table and I make acorns all winter long. It's like a little old lady knitting. So there's a native magnolia, the big leaf magnolia and the cucumber magnolia, and this is the largest non-tropical leaf in the world, and it's a plant that grows naturally in all our woods. Nobody ever knows about it. People think it's a tobacco leaf, but these things are so big and so sturdy that in the fall when they start to come off the tree, I really love to use them in clay. So while the leaves are still green and full of water, basically I can press them onto this big slab of clay. This one's got a double-sided, so it'll be a bowl, but I can leave the leaf on if I want to and just burn it off in the kiln, or I pull the leaf off. I use that leaf over and over again until I kind of wear it out. And then this is just raw clay. I could break this with a fingernail, but once it gets fired then I can add color. And I've been obsessed over this year's patterns on the magnolia leaves. It would be easy for me just to paint this clay vessel straight green, but this year I've been taking photographs of this incredible veining, and I hope that I can at least halfway simulate this amazing fall color. Because again, people that know the tree will be like, that looks exactly like a magnolia leaf. And that's my ideal, is to have this clay leaf sitting on the table and you wouldn't know it was made out of clay until you actually came and touched it. I want this to look exactly like a real leaf that just lasts forever. I grew up the next exit down close to the farmer's market, and I live in the house that I was born in now. And most of the neighbors that were my neighbors when I was a little kid have moved to retirement homes or upstairs to heaven. And one day there was a box of stuff when the old neighbors moved out and new neighbors were moving in, and I kind of avoided the box. I was thinking I had enough stuff as a flea market kind of guy. And then finally somebody showed me that there was a blue fountain in the box, and I already have a blue tree and a blue garden. Basically, if there's a color for the garden, it's purple and blue. So to just have the universe hand me a ready-made cobalt blue fountain. I even had a negative space, an open space under this blue tree. So I found the fountain, and within an hour it was pushing water in my garden. The lady that had moved away from the house actually got word that I had brought her fountain here. She came here. I was not here when she came to see it, but it was running that day, and apparently it looked really good. And she apparently was moved to tears that the fountain had moved its way into this place. And she's no longer with us now, so I'm so glad that she got to see it in its new home before she took off upstairs. Well, this tree in particular I play with all winter. I've discovered I really like the juxtaposition of LED Christmas lights along with old school regular incandescent Christmas lights. So every year I'll add a few more lights, and I'll play with adding Moravian stars. And so now the tree is half dead and half alive, and the dead half is really brittle and really weak and won't hold bottles anymore. So I've started switching bottles for these weird plastic hollow balls that are at kids' amusement areas. They're ball pit. When you jump in the ball pit, these are ball pit balls, and they're essentially weightless. And it's just a way to get color onto a dead tree. It's been really interesting, my process with bottle trees, as sculpture, as painted, as some of the trees that I have are perfectly live, and I cut their heads off and put bottles on, and some trees like this one I can't actually get to completely die, and I'm trying to get color, I'm trying to get light. It's interesting, the juxtaposition of what's sculpture and what's garden. You know, at what point does killing a tree stop being gardening? The fountain at the bottom of the garden is kind of a showpiece, and I've left it unattached so I can change the configuration. But the bulk of the fountain are these huge plates that were the big water tower that was above the Chesterfield Mill in the River Arch District. There was a crazy fire. The fire burned the old Chesterfield Mill, which was built with chestnut beams as big as, as big as whole tree trunks. There was a probably 3-story, maybe taller water tower that sat there, and it survived the fire, but people were convinced that the legs had gotten so hot that they were compromised. So a couple of years after the mill burned, they actually cut the legs and dropped the tower and cut the actual tanks apart. And I was lucky enough to be there the day they were working on it, and we got a bunch of big plates from the water tower. So it's amazing to think that they're a big but decorative fountain now, and for 100 years those big plates stood 200 feet in the air with hundreds of thousands of gallons of water for 100 years. It's amazing. Well, the whole shovel garden, the whole shovel hinge, there's a lot of different names for my shovel garden, started when I was working as a decorator at the Biltmore House, and they asked me to design big harvest pieces for big barn doors. So I was using sheaves of wheat and large farm equipment. So I started looking at the scrap yards for pitchforks and shovels and just tools that had some antiquity to them. And what I started finding was 15 or 20 round shovels to every other tool that I found. So I started getting all the tools, but I started especially just saving round shovels. And I had seen in a garden magazine some person had put shovels all on a wall, all in the same direction, and just a repeated element is what appealed to me initially. And I didn't even own this garden when I started that shovel collection. So a lot of what I do in the garden is about repetition. I see shapes, or I see objects like Tonka trucks or like shovels or like bird cages, and after I start seeing them for a while, the repeat starts to make sense. I have to constantly edit and not have too many kinds of things in the garden or too many colors. It's a really strict palette, and if I have too many things, the garden either becomes a children's playground or it just becomes really junky looking. So shovels, the round shovels, became almost an obsession now. Every time I go to the scrapyard, I stay at the scrapyard until I find a round shovel. Sometimes I battle heat exhaustion, but I stay and I inhale all the nasty dust. But now people bring me shovels. I beg for shovels and for blue bottles, and I get a lot more shovels dropped off than I do blue bottles for sure. I've got more than 100 shovels in the air now, and I'll bet I've got another 50 with the handles burned out that I need to put up on poles. So I'm going to keep going all around the circle. I'm going to keep intensifying that. I'm not going to put round shovels anywhere else. So the shovel circle is just going to get thicker and thicker. The bird cages are another thing that just comes from repetition. There's a great Prince song that says there's joy in repetition. I started getting bird cages really cheap, either at the scrapyard or at the Goodwill. And now my rule is I can't pay more than $5 for a bird cage. I also won't pay more than 50 cents or a quarter for a shovel. The bird cages have become a memorable part of the garden, and it always flatters me when people say, "Oh, we saw a bird cage today and we bought it at a yard sale. Can we bring it to you? Would you like, oh, there's a bird cage in my granny's basement. I would love to have your granny's bird cage, even more than one that I would get from the Goodwill. I would love that." One lady was pretty hilarious, said, "I bet you get tired of people telling you what you should do. I bet you get really tired of people saying, 'Hey, you know what would be cool?'" And I said, "Well, it's okay. It depends on the delivery." And then this lady came and put her hand on my shoulder and she said, "You know what you should do?" And her suggestion was to put little cups of bird seed in the bird cages. The cages now are filled with little bad 60s Christmas angels. For some reason, little gold angels take me back to my childhood. And all the cages are open, so the angels aren't trapped. People initially think, why has he got angels trapped in the cage? And they're really not. The doors are open. And this lady's suggestion was basically to put birdseed in the cages so that the birds could hang out with the angels. And I just thought that was a really, really cool idea. And I did that until I saw a squirrel gnawing on an angel's head. And then I stopped the birdseed again for a little while. The painting in the garden was kind of an afterthought. I had been acquiring canvases for another artist, thinking that she would paint over and start new, and she didn't want to do that. So I was actually on my way to the Goodwill, had a truckload of stuff to take to the Goodwill, drove into the garden to get some random chair, and I said, "Man, this is an oil painting. This thing would live outside for a while." I don't know who the artist was here. I kind of like the painting. I didn't like it well enough to put it in the house, but it'd be really cool out here in the garden. And again, it didn't know who painted it, and I figure it's an oil painting. It's going to last fairly well. So I put it on the fence and really love the idea. People completely love the idea of a random painting being displayed outside. It just kind of changes not only my perception, but everybody else's perception. Like, well, of course you can hang a painting on a wall or a fence in the garden? Why can't you? And the other part I really like about the particular painting is it's completely up to interpretation what the little girl is holding. It looks like a bunny, it looks like a little kiwi bird, it could be a duck, it could be a lamb, and it's almost like a pop psychology test, you know. Maybe we could gauge people's personalities by seeing what animal they imagine that the girl's holding. It's really interesting to have this random, kind of spooky girl painting in the garden. When kids come in the garden, the first thing that appeals to them is the Tonka trucks in the middle of the garden, and that's been a mixed blessing. In the 10 years that I've been here, I've watched a lot of kids grow up from walking through the garden in mama's belly to now being 10-year-old kids who can actually talk to me about plants, and to see them develop a sense of proprietary, just a sense of pride of place. When you come back to a place like this over and over again, you start to develop hey, let me show you this, let me show you that, and I didn't intend to have a children's garden, and I certainly didn't intend and don't particularly want to have a playground, quote unquote. But having kids in the garden has forced me to be neater, it's forced me to be safer, and it just changes the level of interaction. If the only people that came to my garden were gardeners who were asking me garden questions, I probably wouldn't be as social as I am. But kids coming and playing, and parents not needing my company, they're just in the space, using the space, paying attention to their kids. I can have company or not company. I can engage or not engage. So it helps I like to tell people that I'm the most socialized hermit in all of Asheville, because I don't get out, but people come here all the time. So I see tons of people, but I never go anywhere else. I meet perfect strangers that say, man, I almost broke up with my girlfriend on that bench, and we spent hours here. We were here till like 4 o'clock in the morning, and whether the outcome was good or bad, people come here it's almost like, church is not the right word, but it's almost a physical, maybe even sacred space to decompress, and that's completely unintentional, but I'm really grateful for it, because I get that too. I definitely get not just my own ability to decompress, but I kind of get the wash of other people's coming here to be at ease. I think I definitely benefit from that, whatever energy's left over from that. About 4 years ago, my 80-year-old father was in a really amazing and awful accident. He used to drive a moped every day to his little senior center, and he kind of tragically lost his leg in a motorcycle wreck. And so I had just gotten back from Costa Rica after a year, and I basically moved in with my father for the remaining 3 years of his life. And my home is 2 minutes from the garden. I'm very close to where I was born. And the whole time that I was taking care of my father, I decided that I would take it on as a full-time job. We didn't hire any nurses. We didn't hire any kind of outside help. And so I took him to the doctor, and I took care of him at home. But the entire rest of the time, I worked in the garden, and I treated taking care of my father as a full-time job. But the garden has always also been a full-time job, and being in the garden when I was not with my father was what completely got me through the process of grieving over his accident, and then eventually grieving over his slow and very peaceful passing, so that when the day my father died, I came here and planted a shrub, and I was much more ready to move on and much better equipped to deal with his passing than if I had been working a job and taking care of him, a job that was a source of stress or was not a way to decompress. So I told everybody that being in the garden while I was taking care of my father was my really cheap therapist, and I really believe that. I'm a lot more grounded than a lot of people that I know. I might have the same kinds of problems that they have, but because I spend the vast majority of my days here in this space, I'm able to slough off my problems and deal with issues just way more easily than almost anyone else I know. I count myself really lucky that way. You'll have to edit it really carefully to not make me sound like a total new age hippie. But yeah, I got this thing to say about a meditation when we started.
Sure.
When the garden was brand new, I sat with a group of people in what felt like the very center of the garden, which is kind of now the center of the shovel garden. And we just had an intentional kind of invocation. We just wanted to see what energy was here and what we could summon to the place. And I'm not typically a meditation guy, and I'm not typically a person to have visions materialize, but as we were sitting there trying to, I guess, consecrate the space, I got this vision of an immense 10,000 gallon drop of honey coming up out of the sky and landing right where we were and hitting the ground and slowly, kind of like honey, not like water, rippling and reverberating away. And I think that's a little bit of where the shovel, or where the circle theme became solidified. And so now I kind of think that that's true. You can see this circle, this eyeball from space. And so many people come to the garden and enjoy themselves and relax and breathe and take in a tiny little chunk of nature in the middle of the city. So it has become this meditative ripple that just hits the ground and plays out and then comes back, and it feeds me and it feeds the people that use the garden. So I'm really grateful that that initial vision of this immense drop of honey came down and has continued to inspire me. It's a goal to provide a place for people to decompress.
Wishes began butterflies above us.